It's the Eddie Jason and Chris Show. That's right. We are on Twitter, EJC Show. Also Facebook. Find us on there if you haven't done that yet. On Skype, our paranormal correspondent, are we still calling you that? Samantha Scarlette is on the line.
Hey.
Is that what you are, the paranormal correspondent?
Yes, I guess I'm the Eddie Jason and Chris Show paranormal correspondent. I don't know. Whatever you want to call me. I don't care.
Well, how are you?
I'm good. By the way, if I sound weird, though, I'm getting a cold. I woke up this morning with a sore throat. So if I sound strange this week, that's why.
Well, it's okay. Quite all right. I was actually on your website this week, and I saw you had some really cool photos of that. I don't even know what it's called, but it's like where you put the hooks into your skin and then you hang.
Oh, suspension.
Does that hurt?
See, everyone thinks it hurts, and they're all like, "Oh, did the piercings hurt?" The piercings actually hurt a lot less than like getting like your nose pierced. And then as soon as you get your back pierced, because there's really no nerves, your adrenaline rush like kicks in. It's kind of the fight or flight response. So when you're hanging and they pull you up, you don't feel any pain, but then about 5 hours later, you kind of feel like you were hit by a car.
Oh my God!
Why did you do it?
I just did it out of curiosity. Like I saw it on the Travel Channel about like 8 or 9 years ago, and then I knew like a bunch of people that did it in New York from like the goth scene, and I read up on it. And supposedly you could have like a religious experience with it. So I was just curious about it.
Did you?
It's definitely like different. I would totally do it again.
Well, if anybody
do you recommend it?
What?
I said, do you recommend it?
I don't know that I necessarily recommend it. It's kind of not for everyone. It's one of those things. I would say it's kind of like religion. You should like do a lot of research on it before you decide whether this is the right path for you to try it out.
Well, if anybody wants to see those photos, definitely check those out at samanthascarlette.com. So I just wanted to make sure we plug your website, and that's a good way to or a good reason to go check it out. But we should get our guest on the line here, Steve Hodel. That's how we say his name, correct? And
yes, I believe so.
He's a New York Times best-selling author, and he spent 24 years with the LAPD, I guess, and he's an expert on the Black Dahlia murder, right?
Yes, his father actually is accused of murdering the Black Dahlia in their home, the Soden House, which is a really famous house in L.A. It was built by Frank Lloyd Wright's son, Lloyd Wright, in 1926, and the house was featured in Leonardo DiCaprio's The Aviator and on America's Next Top Model. Right. And the house is allegedly haunted, but that is where the Black Dahlia was allegedly murdered. So,
well, let's get him on the line here. We won't keep him waiting because he is expecting our call. A very fascinating guest.
I feel like the EJC studio should move there.
Yeah, we should. Is it for rent?
Hello.
I think it's for sale.
Hello, Mr.
Hi.
Hello, Mr. Steve Hodel. How are you? Welcome to the Eddie Jason and Chris Show. Samantha Scarlette is here as well. How are you?
Great. I'm terrific. How are you guys doing?
Doing fantastic. So for our listeners who may not be familiar, Mr. Steve Hodel is a New York Times best-selling author. He spent 24 years at the LAPD, where as a homicide detective he worked on more than 300 murder cases and achieved one of the highest solve rates in the force. Congratulations on that. And your first book is Black Dahlia Avenger, A Genius for Murder, and that's a New York Times bestseller, talking all about the Black Dahlia murder and more. And welcome to the show. How are you?
Oh, I'm great. Good to be with you guys.
This is such a fascinating topic.
It really is.
Yeah, go ahead, Samantha.
Go ahead.
So for anyone that's not aware, in 1947, I think it happened in January, 22-year-old wannabe actress Elizabeth Short was discovered in the Leimert Park neighborhood of Los Angeles. She was cut in half at the waist. I believe there was no blood on sight. Her face was like slit in one of those like Chelsea grin type things. And it was just a very gruesome murder. And she was discovered by a mother who was walking her baby. She originally thought it was a mannequin just from the bizarre way that the body was thrown about and completely nude right next to the sidewalk. And the case has never been solved until about the early 2000s. A lot of stuff came to light that Steve's father, Dr. George Hodel, could have perpetrated the murder. So, Steve, can you tell us about it? And how did you first suspect that your father murdered the Black Dahlia?
Yeah, well, the strange thing is that this case came to me. I was long retired from LAPD. I was doing private investigations, and basically my father died at the age of 91 in 1999, and I went down to San Francisco, did all the things you have to do to take care of a father's passing, we were very close, and I had spent the last 10 years. He had been out of country for a long time, and then the last 10 years of his life, he returned to San Francisco. We saw a lot of each other and became very close. And I was given his widow June gave me a number of things, and that started me on this impossible, took me down the rabbit hole, I guess you could say. A couple of things were a photograph of a beautiful dark-haired young woman about in her early 20s who apparently appeared to be Elizabeth Short.
Oh, wow.
And I thought, well, that's interesting. Dad knew her from back then. And a bunch of other things came, about 5 or 6 things. We don't have really time to go into all of the things that started me on this adventure, but I talked with my half-sister after his passing. We're talking about the great man and his remarkable life. And she comes out of nowhere and says, he was a suspect in the Black Dahlia murder. What are you talking about, Tamar? Wow. Where is this coming from? And she and I had only had maybe 10, 20 minutes of conversations in the past 50 years.
Oh, wow.
So she was in Hawaii and had kind of, she was a victim of incest. My father had been arrested back in 1949 and tried in Los Angeles for sexual intercourse with her. He was acquitted in a kind of an OJ verdict. They came back even though there were 3 witnesses, adults present during the acts, and that's when he left the country. Anyway, I said, no way, and I started looking at it, and I'd been a homicide detective for, 17 years, and I knew about the case, but I didn't even know the victim's name, Elizabeth Short. Anyway, I said, well, there's no way he could have been involved in that. He was an amazing guy, and he was pretty quirky, and he had his idiosyncrasy, shall we say, but murder, no way.
Wow.
So I started out began to show that he had nothing to do with this crime, and followed the evidence, and 2 years later, I'm submitting it to the DA in secret to review the case, and he comes back and says, there's enough here to file and win a case at a trial. So that's the short version of it.
Okay.
Now, in 2004, you found someone found the documents in the LA County vault of the original investigation from 1949.
That's right, Samantha. What actually happened was my book came out, and after I got the DA's, saying that he would file based on my investigation, there's enough to file a case against George were he still alive. I wrote the book, it came out, and that blasted open some secret files in the DA's office. And these files, we discover that George Hodel all along was the prime suspect. They knew it was a surgeon, and Dad was a skilled surgeon.
And that would explain the cutting in half of the torso, right? If he was a skilled surgeon, that's more evidence that might...
Oh, yeah. No, yeah. I had 6 surgeons review the photographs, and they all said this had to have been done by a surgeon, which, of course, limits the suspect pool dramatically.
Uterus was also
but removed. He was actually named as the actual suspect all along, and these were hidden away, these secret files. It was he split the country, and there's a whole lot. You kind of have to understand the history of what was going on. L.A. was very corrupt back then, the LAPD and the city, the mayor and everybody. It was a real-life L.A. Confidential kind of thing back then.
Wow. Now, you also believe your father may have been the Zodiac killer, is that correct?
Yeah, well, I would have never gone there, except what happened was I got the secret files, and I discovered that Elizabeth Short, the Black Dahlia, just a few months before she's murdered, goes back to Chicago and starts investigating a murder, the 3 different murders. They were called the lipstick murders in Chicago, which were very famous. 2 adults and then 1 6-year-old child, surgically bisected, posed on city streets, just like the Dahlia case would be later. And hemicorpectomy, they knew it was a surgeon that did it. Anyway, go ahead.
Just real quick, I know the Zodiac Killer, there's a famous sketch of what this man might have looked like. Does that resemble your father at all?
Yeah, well, there are 3 different sketches that were done, the composites. And I always thought Zodiac was a much younger man. But when I got into the weeds of investigating, it turns out he was actually the best witness. It was a police officer that actually saw him and said he was about 45 years old, actually. Well, Dad was 60, but he could pass easily for 45. And if you look at the second composite, it's a picture-perfect drawing. But there's a lot more than that. Since then, we cracked a code, one of the codes that was sent in a cipher by Zodiac, and Dad actually signed his name, Hodel, in the cipher code.
Wow.
So, I mean, there's no doubt it all comes together, but it's a very bizarre. What he did was he reinvented himself from the Black Dahlia Avenger, which is the name he gave himself in the 40s, to Zodiac in the 60s, and he just started, in Northern California and taunting the papers, handwriting 25 notes, just like he did in L.A. Whole bunch of similarities. There's about 32 unique crime signature points that I point out. But the icing on the cake was this latest recent development that just came out. I came out last year with a new book, a second book, Most Evil 2, which cracks this Frenchman, a high school teacher, cracked the code. And actually, it was an ancient Celtic code that spells out Hodel.
Oh, wow.
So,
wow.
Yeah.
That's
No,
great.
going.
Isn't it
No,
quite
going
unusual? I'm just going to interject here. Isn't it quite unusual for a serial killer to change his modus operandi?
Well, it wasn't changed very much. Like I say, there's 31. I point out 31 different crime signature MOs that are identical between Avenger and Zodiac. You know, what's unusual is the taunting, sending in notes and stuff. I had, in all of my murder investigations, I never had a suspect that actually sent in, taunting notes to the police. And of course, we both had that both in Black Dahlia Avenger and in Zodiac. He sent in 25 over the years. And the handwriting, I did blind analysis by experts, and they came back and made the handwriting. There's a whole lot of stuff that connects him. I've actually was able in the Dahlia case to connect to physical evidence from our Soden house, that Mayan temple on Franklin, to actually the crime scene. There were some cement bags that I was able to connect from one to the other. So it's a massive amount. It's way beyond any reasonable doubt. I mean, as far as the cases are concerned. So, it's come a long way. That's why there's now 4 books out. It's one
as far as
investigation.
him writing letters, and then I just want to step back to the investigation. But as far as him writing letters, could he have been inspired by Jack the Ripper? Because Jack the Ripper sent in letters to the police stations and newspapers in England, and the crimes are kind of similar in the fact that the Black Dahlia had her uterus removed, and Jack the Ripper liked to cut out the sexual reproductive organs as well. So.
Not only that, Samantha, but he actually cut off, in one of the Chicago cases, he sent a human ear to the victim's parents and said, "You're next." Well, Jack the Ripper actually said he would cut off an ear and send it in. And you're absolutely right. I'm sure he was a ripperologist. I'm sure he was very familiar with Jack the Ripper's crimes because he does a lot of different things. He writes in mercurochrome, which was a red antiseptic, pretending it's blood like Jack the Ripper did in his days. He used ink. And there's a whole bunch of similar things that he does in these, both the Zodiac and the Dahlia cases that mimic Jack the Ripper. So you're absolutely right on that.
On a personal note, knowing your father the way you did, what do you think might have motivated him to commit these atrocities?
Well, I try in all of my books, I try and look at the different triggers, and there's a whole bunch of them. He was a very unique individual, 186 IQ, 1 point above Einstein. Incidentally, that skips a generation, so my boys are in good shape. But anyway, he was a misogynist. He was an urban terrorist. His thrill was in holding cities hostage. He did it with L.A., terrorizing them with the notes and tauntings. He did it as Zodiac in San Francisco. He did it in Chicago. And he also did one in Manila, just a few miles from his house. When he left the country here, he was about to be arrested by LAPD, and he fled the country and went to Manila and reinvented himself there as a market researcher, psychiatrist. And he actually committed a Dahlia murder in Manila just a few miles from his home. And again, it was the same thing, surgical bisection, on and on.
Now,
so, but as far as the triggers, I'm congenital. I'm absolutely sure. He was insane, no question about that.
Definitely.
But he had this tremendous hatred of women. He was a misogynist.
How do you
sadist.
separate yourself from this? I mean, it is your own father. I mean, when you're going down the road in this investigation, do you not? How are you feeling about it personally?
Yeah, well, as I say, when I started out, I was going to, because we were close, and I loved him. He had 11 children by 5 different women.
Oh my God!
And
busy man.
Yeah, and I was his favorite. Go figure. I was his favorite son, and we were very close, especially the last 10 years. And so I was absolutely sure that I was going to show because I was in awe of my father and his remarkable gifts, and I was going to show he had nothing to do with this. But that's the son, the trained professional homicide detective, followed the evidence, and much to my surprise and shock, it took me the other direction, and it all came together. So I had to separate the son who loved his father from the objective homicide detective following the evidence, and it's been rough. I mean, I've been through every possible emotion you can go through, frankly, and now it's just a terrible sadness for me.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, Steve, at this point, like with all the information that you know, would you say that you still love your father?
Oh, yes, I do. I mean, I know that sounds hard to believe because he was one of the world's worst, misogynists and serial killers. But he gave me life. His blood flows through me. So yeah, there's a part of me that still loves my father, and I see him kind of as a Jekyll and Hyde. The good Dr. Jekyll who could have done anything for good, unfortunately, was the monster, the Mr. Hyde inside of him was stronger, and it took over and was all powerful. So I love the Jekyll, and I hate the monster inside of him that killed. Right now, we're up to 25 and still counting murders over 40 years.
Now, stepping way back, because I had more stuff that I just wanted to cover in this. When the 1949 investigation went on, they bugged the house. I think it was in the early winter of 1950. And when they bugged the house, they have tapes where he basically confessed to killing the Dahlia and to killing his secretary. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. When we got into these secret files after my book came out and blasted open this vault that had been locked away in the DA's office for 55 years, we found these secret transcripts. The 18 detectives, 24/7 around the clock. They bugged our home, and this is not phone bugs. This is actual live microphones hidden in the walls, and recording his actual live conversations. And the biggie, the reason for what I call a Dahlia Gate, the cover-up by LAPD, was a murder actually happened while they're staked out. I'm reading these transcripts, and I can't believe it. I'm turning the pages, and it says it says George Hodel goes down to the basement. An object is heard striking. A woman screams. More blows. A woman screams again.
God.
And I'm reading this, and I'm thinking, they're 5 minutes away. Why aren't they out the door and making a rescue? Well, they did nothing. They just sat there, and
so
it was either a
sort of like
felony or a murder.
It was sort of like an internal personnel kind of cover up, and they're just trying to save each other's backs with the brotherhood.
Now,
there.
Well. Yeah, I mean, that you have to understand what was going on in L.A. at the time. Chief Parker was about to take command. He was literally weeks away from becoming the new chief, and he knew if this came out, that it would take away his chance of, cleaning up the department and turning it around. So I'm sure they made this kind of Machiavellian decision to say, well, let's lock this away for now. We'll come back to it at a future time. But for now, let's lock this away. And he's fled the country. Dad took off and left. We may be able to find him, maybe we can't. So let's just lock it away for now, do what we need to do, and come back to it. And of course, they never did come back to it. They just locked it away and left it like that.
Well, we're running short on time here. We have, I think Samantha had another question or two.
I had a couple more
Chris
questions. One I want to know: do you think were you or any members of your family possibly home when any of the murders occurred? And if so, how could he have removed the body? And then I just wanted to ask a couple quick questions about the haunting stuff.
Yeah, well, that was that question came to me. I said, "There's no way he's going to do this murder there with us home." Well, we find out from the transcripts, the secret DA files, we weren't there. Mom and us three boys were away for that 3-week period in staying with her brother, our uncle. So the house was alone. He was there alone by himself during that time period.
And what about the
hauntings?
What
was the other question?
Well, can I?
Obviously, another really quick one
jump
before we get to
in
the
real
haunting
fast
thing is,
because I
how
have
did your father come to meet Elizabeth Short?
Samantha, hold on. I want to segue off of your last question.
Okay.
Have any of your siblings or other family members rejected your conclusions?
Well, like I say, there's 11 of us out there. My full brother, total acceptance. Of course, Tamar, the victim of the incest, is totally on board. The Filipino family says no, there's no way. He was a loving father, and of course they only knew him for 4 years. He was married to their mother in the Philippines, and they saw him on occasion, but they all reject it. They say there's no way this can be. She became a senator in the Philippines, and there's a whole culture there where the Asian culture where it's about saving face. You're not gonna, even if it was true, they wouldn't. They couldn't understand how you could present something like this as a family secret.
Right.
So it's a whole different thing. But I guess it's split, for the most part, and they haven't read my books either. So
what about your mother, Steve?
My mother passed before she knew. There's no question, and there's a whole. My mom was married to John Huston, the famous film director.
Oh wow!
And he was good friends with Dad, and so there's a whole Hollywood thing in there and throughout that we've throughout. And Dad was basically an untouchable. He was the head of LA County Health Department, venereal disease control, treating the rich and famous.
Hiding in plain sight.
Houston was very close to us, so. My mom knew, but she took it to her grave.
John Huston, of course, the famous director of The Maltese Falcon and other film noirs.
Samantha, go ahead. I know you had a couple more questions. We're almost out of time, though. Go ahead.
How do you think your father met Elizabeth Short? Is it true, like how they portrayed on American Horror Story, that he was carrying out backroom abortions?
Well, he admits on the tapes, on the DA tapes, we know for a fact that he was committing abortions because he admits it. She had a Bartholin gland problem that was infected, and I think that's probably how they met. He owned a private VD clinic downtown, so they may have met that way, or Man Ray was also our family photographer. He was a famous surrealist photographer. And it looks like she modeled for him, and he did some paintings of her. So Dad could have met her through Man Ray. Either way, I'm not sure which. But there's a whole surrealist aspect to this that we don't have time to touch on. But it's a very important part of his crime signature. He repeated a lot of it. He posed her body to mimic a couple of Man Ray's famous photographs, and it's just the whole thing is just really very bizarre.
The whole thing is surreal, quite honestly.
So if we can get to the haunting, the two main things with the haunting are, one, Zoran Babels, when he purchased the house, or Balbez, I'm sorry if I mispronounced his name, purchased the house around 2001, 2002. He renovated the house. He used Eric Lloyd Wright, who's Lloyd Wright's son, who's a great architect. My mom actually interviewed him for a documentary she did to help with the renovations. And during the renovation process, he started feeling it. Zoran Babels did. He started feeling an evil presence within the house within a month or so of moving in. And he actually had a Native American shaman and a priest cleanse the house. And the house was also, I think it was after he sold the house, was featured with you on the Sci-Fi Channel's show Ghost Hunters. So if you could tell us about those little things, that'd be great.
Yeah, well, I'm not into the paranormal, and I kind of, because I don't want it to contaminate my investigation, I want it to be objective and, all the things that you can need for court. So I don't go into the paranormal aspects of it. But at the same time, we had a forensic, I had an opportunity, I went on Ghost Hunters because I had an opportunity to do a forensic testing with a cadaver dog, Buster. And we did that there, and he actually alerted to human remains in the basement and at the rear of the house. And we took soil samples. Bodies? Those were analyzed, and they came back positive for human remains.
Wow.
So No question about that. Dogs don't alert on dead rabbits or rats. They only on human remains.
Well, there's just so much to talk. We can do like an entire show on this. It's such a fascinating topic.
Yeah.
But Steve, we really appreciate you coming
Thank you
on.
so much.
Steve Hodel, New York Times best-selling author.
Fascinating.
And please pick up his books. They all start with Black Dahlia Avenger, A Genius for Murder, and then followed by Most Evil. And then Black Dahlia Avenger 2 and Most Evil 2, and all of those are available now, correct?
You got it.
All right, well, thank you.
You got it. And there's a lot of information there, but it's all one investigation, but it's took me 4 books to get it all together.
Such a fascinating thing. Thank you again for your time. Jason had one quick thing to say.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Just real quick, Steve, if there's anything that pops up in the future in your investigation,
let us know.
Yeah, let us
Come
know.
back.
We'll bring it on and
it's
Okay,
fascinating.
well,
We're
working on trying to get a mini series presented so we can present it visually because of the art aspects and all of that. It would be a good way for people to understand the real history of Los Angeles.
Well, if you
crimes.
need any actors or actresses for that, let us know.
We'd
Our
love to have
host.
you back.
I'll be the Dahlia. No.
We could be a host for the show.
Great talking to all of you. Have a great time.
You too.
Thank you
well.
so
Thank you.
much.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Samantha. That was
Fascinating
Thank you.
conversation.
That was
Wait,
fascinating.
quick fun fact. The psych
Fun
or
fact.
the tarot reader we had on a couple weeks ago, Tamar Lelania, she was actually named after Steve Hodel's sister, Tamar Hodel, who was Tamar the tarot reader's mom's roommate, like in I think the 60s or something. So,
That's so what a connection.
It's a
Yeah.
small world.
What a small world.
Small world.
Sort of a quirky, weird little tangent. Hodel mentioned John Huston, that his mother had been married to. He was a famous director, but he was also a occasional actor, and he starred or co-starred in the movie Chinatown. And in that movie, he plays a character who commits incest with his daughter. So it all it all comes right around on itself.
What a weird multi-layered story.
Ooh.
Yeah.
There's honestly a lot we didn't touch on. But
I know.
No,
I feel we could have done an hour. We could have done an hour with him. All right. Well, Samantha, again, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's always
Thanks,
great.
guys. Talk to you soon.
We'll talk to you
Wonderful.
soon.
Bye.
Bye. There you go.